Welcome to Simplify. I'm Caitlin Schiller.
And I'm Ben Schuman-Stoler.
Hi, Ben. It's good to see you.
What's up?
I've missed you in these past couple of episodes. I had some nice solo hosting opportunities and got to do it with Phoebe, but it was not the same. So I'm really glad you're back today.
That's very sweet. I'm feeling better-ish.
Good. Happy to hear it. And your kid's better too.
This winter for parents has been hardcore, germ-wise. Heavily germy.
So I've heard. And parents are kind of on our mind, actually, because, well, that's part of what the interview is about today. Actually, it's all of what the interview is about today. But also, we have been checking out the responses that you have so kindly furnished us via the survey. And you've been telling us that one of the top topics, the top categories that's interesting to you is parenting. And we were like, hang on a second, parenting. And then we also saw in the survey that Emily Oster was one of the people that you were interested in. And we thought, wait a minute, we actually have an Emily Oster interview, right?
In the can, yeah.
In the can that Ben did. So today, not only is Ben back, you get to hear an interview that Ben did.
Yeah. I mean, they're never as good as yours, but I'm being typecast as the dad, which I guess is what I am.
I mean, you are, but you're also many other things.
Yeah. No, it was cool. I was really happy to get to talk to Emily Oster. She's one of the most forwarded newsletters or newsletter authors of anybody I know in the world, to me.
To you, yes.
Well, I think in general, I mean, in the parenting space and people who are interested in this kind of stuff. But I think you can tell in the interview why people love her. She's got a really cool approach to decision-making and kind of a structured approach to the whole family life and the tough things that we go through.
Yeah.
And that's why it's she's become who she's become.
Yeah. And you love a structure. So what else did you love about this interview? What did you remember about it? And what should people be listening for?
Well, so her book is called The Family Firm, or at least it's one of sort of a trilogy of books she put out, but it's the one that she's most famous for, The Family Firm. And like it says, it's sort of approaching some of the decisions that are made in family life the way you might in a structured company setting, organizational setting.
Yeah.
And so what I remember is that I pushed that a little bit and tried to figure out how structured is structured, because obviously it's a little bit counterintuitive. Family spaces are not where people necessarily want to always bring their business selves.
Yeah.
And yet, you and I were joking about this earlier, but there are times in our personal lives where we wish we were as effective as we are in some professional settings.
Totally.
And
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes people think that like adding a professional sort of framework to relational life outside of work means you're doing it wrong, when that's not totally true. I guess we can talk more about it at the end, because I want to get people into this interview.
I mean, mostly people should listen to the advice and the space that Emily Oster gives people to do things the way they want to, but it's a helpful first step. Yeah.
I also wanted to say we wanted to make sure that you knew, listeners, that we're listening. So you're listening to us, we're listening to you. We've been looking through the results of this survey, like we said we were going to, because the whole point of it was to take a little bit of time, think about how we make Simplify, think about what you want from Simplify, and we're going to take a couple weeks, a little bit of time to make sure we understand going forward how to make this show the best it can be. So we wanted to come back and sort of punt you some really good interviews that we thought were timely, that we thought would be really nice for right now in this moment in the world. And now that we've tided you over and also gotten some information out of you, thank you so much for that. We're going to recalibrate a little bit and then be back with more Simplify.
Yeah. Thank you so much for filling out the survey. And now we have a good idea of how we can kind of give this thing a shot in the arm. And we see that people want it. We see the tens of thousands of you out there. And we want to make the best thing we can. And so thank you. Now we can go and do that.
Yeah, exactly. And if you have not filled out the survey yet and you'd like to, we'd like you to. It is open for a couple more weeks. It'll be in the show notes of this episode and any of the last 3 or 4 episodes. So please go do that. It's been really helpful to hear from you. And yeah, without any further ado, let's get into it. Let's hear from you and Emily Oster.
Can you please introduce yourself the way you like to be introduced?
Sure. Hi, my name's Emily Oster. I'm a professor of economics at Brown University and the author of books about parenting and pregnancy.
Nice. So you say in the book, The Family Firm, control in family life is illusory. Why?
Partly control is illusory because there are many people and because life is unpredictable. And particularly as kids get bigger and things get more complicated, we kind of have this idea that we can kind of make it all work if we organize it enough. But, there's just the inherent unpredictability of what are your kids going to be like? What are you going to be like? That makes it hard to have control even if we'd really like to.
And so what do you think? I mean, I know this is kind of what the whole book is about, but what can we do?
What we can do is we can have control over the way that we make decisions or the way that we approach things. And I think the book is really about kind of decision-making frameworks and the idea that, you can't always predict what's going to happen. You can't always be sure that you made the right decision, but you can be more confident that you made the decision in the right way. And that itself is both helpful for making better decisions, but also helpful for feeling comfortable and happy, even when those decisions actually do turn out to be wrong.
Yeah. Do you think decision-making is more difficult now? I mean, we hear a lot about this, quote unquote, modern age of parenting or age of modern parenting. Do you think this generation is actually different from previous ones?
I think there's like two things that are different. So one is because of a lot of the demographic shifts that particularly for certain socioeconomic groups, people are having kids later. They've already, accomplished something or done various things. And I think that leads many of us to approach our parenting in sort of the same way that we approached our jobs. Like, okay, this is something I'm going to accomplish. And if you're thinking of your parenting as something to accomplish, it kind of naturally lends itself to a level of pressure that I think is different maybe than people had put on themselves earlier. So I think that's kind of one piece. And I think there is also a piece around when there's so much information and so much opportunity for people to sort of see what you're doing and to decide that information has led them to think their decisions are right and your decisions are wrong. That may be different than it was. Although I will say that there's always this tendency to sort of paint earlier generations like with rose-colored glasses, and for our parents to say like, oh, I was so relaxed, but I don't know if you were really so relaxed in the moment. That may just be something they make up.
It's the best thing about being a parent is that you have to confront your own parents in a lot of ways, right? Like you start thinking about how did they do it, or I wonder if how they would have dealt with this decision that I'm facing right now. And for a lot of the stuff, I have to say, reading your book also, I was quite proud of my parents. I was a little bit surprised of like how impressed I felt by them, because I felt like, oh my God, all these enormous, scary decisions and difficult ones. And they had 3 kids and we all came out more or less fine. And I wrote my sister and I was like, how did they do that? I don't think they did frameworks. We should interview mom and dad to figure out how, was it all automatic before we had books like yours?
I talked to my mom a lot about kind of how they parented, and I think we're in some ways very, very similar. But she's always like, "Why do you have to write all this stuff down?"
What do you say? How did those conversations actually go?
I think my mother and I are very, very similar, and so when I wrote particularly most recent book, she was like, this is a good book, but like everybody already does this. Like this approach, like everyone's already doing this approach. And I was like, no, that's just you. I think she does do some of the kinds of stuff that I did, but I think not in quite such a deliberate way.
But so why do you think this book needs to exist right now? I mean, we talk about this generation and decision making. Why this book now?
In some ways, what drew me to write this was that I think that people, and maybe this is because of some of the earlier stuff that I did, but, people have gotten into very into the idea that data is holding some key, that, if we are approaching our data or our parenting with data, that we can make the right decisions, and that can be sort of the key to success in some way. Part of the point of this book in some ways is like that's not necessarily true, or at least that the data is not always as good as you think it is, and there are sort of pieces in there that are helpful, but ultimately you need to wrap the data with some kind of approach that takes into account your values and your preferences, and also accepts that there isn't a particular right answer. So this is this book is really an acknowledgement that like decision making should be central as data. And I think people sometimes miss that. I think we're not always very deliberate with decisions we make, even when they turn out to be enormously important for our day-to-day lives.
Yeah, I'm not an economics genius, but I believe, if I remember correctly, that like classic economics relies on a rational actor to some extent, right? Like that concept of the econ.
Sure.
But like like we all know, parents are pretty much the least rational thinkers most of the time. So how do you protect for that? Like how do you address that?
So the sense in which we sort of talk about people being rational is that when we think about their preferences, if someone is rational, they're going to have a set of preferences which are totally internally consistent, and reflect a careful weighing of cost and benefits, and kind of have all kinds of other basically mathematical features, which we sort of know in the data are not what we see, that in fact people's preferences have all kinds of intransitive properties, and people overweight some things and underweight other things, and so I think that's just sort of true in the data. I would say sort of two kind of notes as it relates to the book. One is that the point of this decision making is, even if your preferences are totally wacky and weird and irrational, you can still try to make good decisions based on those preferences. So you can still say, I'm going to sit down and think carefully about my decisions, and even though my preferences are not what economists would think would be totally rational, I can still make decisions that are in line with those preferences. But I also think that some of being deliberate in these ways can help us make better decisions in cases in which the irrationality of our base nature is going to lead us into something that we don't want to do. And for example, people have a strong tendency to kind of overreact to risks that are very small. And I think that's something which you can sort of fight against a little bit by being more deliberate about the way that you think about those choices. And sometimes I think that does kind of matter for people's decisions.
Your book has all these amazing, specific, very relevant, like the most tender questions. But a lot of them you were like, look, that we don't have the best data I wish we had. Why is there such a dearth of good data out there?
I think partly people don't really like to experiment with their parenting. And all of the choices that people make are kind of inherently bound up in each other, which is in some ways kind of the point of the book. But there's very few, particularly when people are thinking carefully about these choices, there are actually very few of them where you can be like, oh, people are just making those choices randomly. So when people make a choice to sit down every night with their family for dinner, or to send their kid to a particular kind of school, or have them watch more or less television, those are really wrapped up in all together with each other, together with other characteristics. And I think that's part of the problem, is we don't have a lot of scope for experimentation in most of these settings. And the world is not experimenting for us because people are making these decisions in ways that reflect so many other features of their families.
Yeah. Well, then maybe we should dig into this a little bit, because I feel like we're speaking a little bit theoretically about the main thing of the book, which is probably the 4 Fs. Can you walk us through the 4 Fs, and then we can try and dig through a specific example? So
the idea behind this sort of 4F approach is to say that when you're making larger size decisions in your family, you want some kind of explicit framework to make them. And so this framework says, first frame the question, think carefully about the options that you're choosing between. Second step is fact find, which means, collect all the data. Some of that is data about, impacts on your kids. Some of it is going to be literally like logistics data. Like, if I'm going to make this choice, how would I make it work? What else would it interact with? So you kind of get all the information. The third step is to make a decision. So to wait to make the decision until you are ready to make the decision, but then to make it all at once and try to move on. And then there's a fourth F, which is follow-up, which suggests that people think carefully about when they will have an opportunity to revisit the decision and actually explicitly plan to do so, with the idea that because we can't be sure that our decisions will be correct, we want to leave this space to acknowledge that they might not be wrong, they might not be right, and we might want to sort of redo them later, and that's kind of part of the decision making. So the idea is really to sort of walk through that when you are making one of these big decisions, with the hope that it improves the decision outcomes.
Yeah, and that we need a framework, right? Because like the stuff we talked about a few minutes ago, as parents, you're fighting off chaos left and right.
Exactly.
So what example do you feel like, what are you feeling drawn to at the moment?
So I kind of like the summer camp example.
Can we walk through like how the 4Fs work with summer camp?
Yeah. So I often think about this in the context of kind of, should you send your kid away to summer camp? This is like a very, should your kid go away for some period of time? And I think it's common to kind of approach that as just like, I will tell you the way I first approached this when my daughter brought it up, which was like, absolutely not, over my dead body. I will never allow you to do this. But I think it is a place where people have really gut reactions based on what they did. So actually, when I asked my friends, one of them was like, "Are you kidding? I'd never send my kid away." And the other one was like, "Oh yeah, I went away like for 8 weeks, like starting at the age of 7, and like everyone has to go to summer camp, and it's the most important thing for like personal development that you could do." I was like, "Okay, it seems different." So you want to sort of start here by asking the question, which is, like, and again, it's so the idea of him framing the question is, rather than saying, should my kid go to summer camp or not, to try to be a little bit more explicit about, should my kid go to sleepaway camp or do this other camp, or should they go to sleepaway camp this year or next year? Like, really try to define a smaller number of options that, like, or not is sort of too infinitely large to allow you to sort of do that trade-off explicitly. And then you want to get some data. And I think in the case of summer camp, there's kind of really both this logistics piece and the data piece. I actually think the data piece is kind of it's kind of interesting. So you sort of dig into like, are there any benefits or costs or whatever to sending your kid to camp? There actually are it's like a reasonable amount of data suggesting that kids can benefit from these experiences for some of the same reasons that they benefit from some extracurriculars, which is that they provide a social environment that is distinct from the home social environment.
And belonging, right? Wasn't belonging part of that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's like there's a sense of belonging, and particularly like and it's, a lot of the work on this is done in the context of kids who sort of have specific reasons that it is difficult to feel like they belong at home. So, kids who are ill or have some other issues, but actually, like, you don't have to have any specific issues to not feel like you fit in middle school, I assure you. And so, this is kind of a place that it's like kids often generate a sense of belonging, a sense of kind of self that is distinct from their home self. And that turns out to be really valuable for socio-emotional reasons and anxiety and stuff like that. But there's also like a big logistics piece, right? Like, okay, well, if I'm going to let my kid go to summer camp, we need to know like where that was and how much it cost and what would it mean we couldn't pay for instead of this, and how would we get them there? And, all kinds of like just details, that seem like you might have the instinct to say, okay, well, let's just decide to do this and we'll kind of figure that out later. But like, you probably can't just figure that out later. Like, if your kid's going to be gone for 8 weeks in the summer and it's going to cost you thousands of dollars, that you like kind of want to think about that before you tell them that they can do it. And then there's a kind of like, once you've gotten all that, then you want to sit down and make a decision. And then there's this last piece of like follow up, which really says, okay, well, there's going to come a time in the fall when you're going to have to make a decision about doing this again. And, if you didn't do it, there's an opportunity to think, well, do we want to do it now? And if you did do it, it's a question of, do we want to do it again? Or was that like a nice experiment that taught us that we didn't like going to summer camp, for example?
One question that came up to me when I was thinking about the 4Fs was, if I had to do the 4Fs, I would have added a fifth one, which would be like family, friends. I can't really make a big parenting decision without talking to a sister or a friend or a parent. does that fit into the framework under data, or what role can family and friends play?
I think that's in the second one. I mean, I think I really like part of, I think that's in this fact finding. I in some ways in the middle there, I think what I'm trying to articulate is the distinction between getting information and then making the decision, and that there's actually a lot of information getting. There's the kind of thinking about your own life, but then there's asking other people. There's like collecting information, and the key is really to try, like in some ways, to try like emotionally to turn off the decision making while you're getting the information. So rather than talking to your sister and having her be like, oh yeah, you should definitely do it, and then be like, okay, we're going to do it. And then talking to your mom and having her be like, absolutely not, terrible idea. Okay, we're not going to do it. Just like collect that information without making the decision in each moment, and then later be like, okay, who do we trust? It's our sister or your mom.
Yeah. The thing that I like about the framework also is that decision-making really is its own section. I think we forget to make the decision sometimes, right?
Yeah, and I think we remember to make the decision constantly, right? So people tell me like, when I think about these problems, I'm thinking about them all the time, and every time a new piece of information comes in, I'm like making the decision again, and it just takes all of your time. And one of the things I say in the book is like, you want to give these kinds of decisions, you want to give them the time that they deserve because they're important, but you don't want to give them all the time. And I think that is important to note.
Did you ever read this? I think it was an article in the Atlantic like 10 years ago about how Obama stopped making decisions while he was president. How he was like, I'm not going to think about what I eat. I'm not going to think about what I wear anymore. I'm saving all my energy for the most important decisions because I have to make the decisions that 100 people could not make. They only get to my desk when I have to make them. So he's like, and it's been used in all this business literature also, because it's like, how do you only focus on the right decision at the right time?
I hadn't read that, but I think it is interesting, and it relates for me to sort of this idea of like decision fatigue, that if you're having to make every decision, like constantly make important decisions all the time, that is fatiguing. And so there's kind of a value to, isolating the sets of decisions that are important, or setting up some framework. So some decisions like what you're going to eat or what you're going to wear or whatever it is are kind of like almost made for you.
And so what does that decision-making look like in your house, if you don't mind sharing? Like, is it a sort of, you all sit on the floor and, you sort of like, okay, it's a decision time, or, we've come together today to make a decision. Yeah?
More like the second thing. I mean, I think, we've spent a lot of time, not perhaps surprisingly, if you read the book, like thinking about the decisions that we don't have to make, or sort of setting up various kinds of scaffolding. So a lot of kind of day-to-day decisions are just sort of made automatically. But then when there are big decisions like, summer camp, which probably was on my mind because we just made this decision about next summer. We sat down with the relevant kid and just, kind of looked each other in the eye, and we're like, okay, you did this last summer. Like, is there anything we want to change? Do we want to do it again? And, making sure that kind of, we had a moment to sit and reflect and, do this in a group. I was forced to send a meeting invite to both my husband and my daughter, but she didn't respond to it, but she came to the meeting anyway.
Sounds like my work. That sounds good.
Yeah.
That sounds good.
It's like, people just show up. He's like, why didn't you RSVP? We need to know how many people to order lunch for.
Exactly. There's another important part of the book, which is not about the 4 F's, which is you call the big picture. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah. So the idea there is that to encourage people to think about what they want their day to look like, and what are the most important pieces of their kind of life to them, and to discuss that explicitly with their partner, if they are parenting along with somebody else. And so there are pieces that are suggesting that people write down what are the 3 things that are the most that you really want to do every day, and what are the 3 things that you really value in your kid. And a lot of it is just sort of versions of an exercise to say, can you say what's most important to you? And can you share that out with other people so you can have an explicit conversation about what are the things we're gonna prioritize? Because part of what happens, at least I think for many people in this kind of as the logistics of parenting older kids gets more and more extreme, is that we end up just doing a lot of things and saying yes to a lot of things and having things sort of build up without recognizing the cost to them, without recognizing what we're not doing when we say yes to each individual thing. And so in some ways, this is a way to step back and ask, what do you want the day to look like? And sometimes that's going to mean you have to say no to more stuff or prioritize some things over other things. But unless we have a holistic view, a big picture view of this, it's hard to see the forest for the trees, I guess.
Writing a mission statement as a company is a huge deal. I guess my concern is that people will hear about this and think that it's too hard, like it's too stressful. Adding meetings to family life is also stressful or something instead of just going with the flow. What do you tell those people?
Yeah. So, I think I have like sort of two messages there. One is that I think actually a lot of the work that is inherent in this, you are already doing. You're just doing it kind of haphazardly and not all at once. So there's a little bit of kind of like moving things to sort of do them all together rather than doing them piecemeal in moments that are not convenient. But I think the other thing I'll tell people is like, yeah, I get it. Like, I get that like you do not want to spend 3 weeks like investing like in organizing your life like this. And I don't think it would take that long, but I do kind of see, and we only got to sort of where we are after many years of kind of adding little pieces of this. And I think that's really the message I would have is like, hey, even if you don't want to like adopt this thing wholesale, there are pieces of this you could do, sort of like ways that you could add deliberateness to what you're doing that I think would improve the people's functioning, people's lives, even in fairly small ways. So I'll give you an example. Somebody told me, like, I read your book. We did one thing, which is we decided to sit down at the beginning of the week and plan who was going to pick our kid up from daycare every day rather than arguing about it every morning. We made a plan one moment and that has really improved our lives. And that's like a tiny thing, but you sort of recognize there are these moments where like every day we're arguing like who's going to do this. And we could just take a minute when in a cold state, not a moment that we're angry or busy or whatever, and just be like, okay, let's make a plan, and then we can follow through on the plan. And I think that some of what I would tell people is just, pick a couple of things that you think might work, a couple of pain points, and see if being a little more deliberate about your plans would actually help with that.
Yeah, I would tell them, do it, and then you'll save a bunch of money on couples therapy in a couple of years.
Right. Yeah. No, I think there's a huge piece of this. My husband read this and he was like, this is like a book about like how to not fight with your partner. Like, this is not about parenting. It's like, okay, that's like fair enough. But I think it's true. I think that like so much of our conflict is about, is this sort of like result of having not said the things that are important and then expecting the other person to know what you think is important because they're your partner. Yeah. But actually, they don't know that.
What if you have a partner that doesn't buy into the idea of spending time on aligning on the big picture?
And that's, complicated. I think, again, I would say like maybe there's like sort of things around the edges where you could improve even if you can't get your partner to sit down and like write a mission statement with you. But even, thinking about some of these bigger pieces and like, what do we want to be doing at the end of the day? What do we want to do at the beginning of the day? That maybe there's some scope for aligning there. But I think it is, there's people have said a sort of version of this to me, which is like, well, I would never want to do this with my partner because we wouldn't agree. And so I don't, this, like, if I do this, I'm just going to find out that we disagree. And I think the answer I'd give is like, you're going to find out if you disagree anyway. Like, you're not avoiding that conflict. You're just pushing it off to a different time.
Yeah. In fact, didn't you write a newsletter that said something like why partners should seek more conflict with each other?
Surface your conflict now because then you can like not fight about it later.
And do you think is some kind of big picture exercise the best way to do that, or how do you start that conversation?
I think that some kind of exercise like that, but it almost could be more practical. So some of the big picture stuff is like write down your values. And I think that for some people that's really, really helpful. And for some people it's like, I don't want to waste my time writing down my values. Like that seems like a bunch of like gobbledygook. So there's a part of this that's about like, okay, just put aside your values. Just write down like what are the 3 things that you want to be doing every day. Like just like 3 things that are important to you to have happen in your day. And that is something that's a little more concrete that I think people can sometimes grab onto. And if you find out that your things are really in conflict with each other, that's a place to start a discussion. So I think in some ways, many of these things are just get something down on paper that you can use as a starting point.
And those things would be like, we have dinner together, or I'm home for bedtime, or...
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or, I go to work, or like it's important to me to go running, or like, it doesn't have to be even things with the family. It could be like personal stuff. Like, it's very important to me to have, for me personally, like going running is very important. I prioritize that.
Okay, that's cool. I wanted to talk a little bit more about tips, some like practical stuff. I'm curious, what muscle do you think parents should try and develop? Like, what do you wish that parents were better at?
I think one issue many of us have, maybe not all, is the kind of attempt to make my kid into me, or to value in my kid the things that I am good at, or the things I wish I were good at. Right. And so I think there's a version of like, your kid is not the conduit for your unfulfilled dreams, which is sort of one issue. But then I think the other issue is just, like it's very easy to see the things that you feel that you're good at, and to sort of see them in your kid and see when they're good at them, when they're not good at them. But it may be harder to see the things that your kid is good at that you're not good at, but those are kind of the things we want to celebrate. So being able to step back and kind of work on the muscle of like, what's my kid good at here? Like what's going to help them excel and whatever is their way. I think we're not using that muscle enough.
Yeah. Do you wish that parents could have some kind of cheat code?
Like up, down, left, right, BA, star for unlimited lives.
Exactly.
Unlimited parenting lives.
Yes. But what would it be? Like, what would the cheat code be for parents?
I don't
that?
know.
Was that Mortal Kombat?
That's like the way you get this is like, I'm totally dating myself, but like that was like how you got like unlimited lives in like Mario or something.
Right. That's awesome. Yeah, but what kind of cheat code? If you could BA, up, down, whatever, your husband or yourself, or all parents,
God.
What do you wish?
I think it would just be to not get mad. And maybe that's like reflecting the age of my kids or something about my kids. But like it is so easy with kids who are kind of like, I think in this sort of like 4 to 15, this like range of kids where like they're not adults, but they seem like they're being a jerk, where it's sort of like the recognition that like, yes, my kid is acting like a jerk, but it's not like when the adults act like a jerk. It's like, they're just like not fully formed in this way. And that I think is really, that like, I struggle with that all the time. If I had a cheat code for just like dial this down, I would use it a lot.
I like total responsibility transfer a lot.
Me too.
And what is it, first of all? And then maybe we can go over like a couple ways to address a specific situation.
Yeah. Okay, so the idea behind the total responsibility transfer is that there is a distinction between helping somebody with a task and taking charge of the task. The example I always like to think of is around meal prep. So there's a version of, I cook dinner where you take the pot and put the water in and put the pasta in and drain it and, put it on the table and then you've like cooked dinner. But actually that's not like being in charge of dinner, because being in charge of dinner is thinking about what you're going to have for dinner and purchasing the items that you need for dinner and then doing all of the other things about dinner and then making sure that like you have the things that you need. Like, and if I said like, I'm putting you in charge of dinner, I am transferring responsibility to you about dinner, that should mean like you are doing all the things about the dinner. And I think part of why this is important is, we kind of, people can feel like, oh, well, I made dinner. It's like, well, no, I had to think about dinner the whole time. All you did, like you did some tasks. It's the difference between being the chef and being the sous chef. in that example. And I think that when we try to share work in our household, there's a lot of value to sort of trying to share it in this kind of like really sharing responsibility. I think that's hard for both the person who is being shared with and for the sharer, which I always think about, like, it's hard for me to transfer responsibility to people because they're not doing it like I would do it, you know? And I think that's the difference between like having someone help you and having someone do it, is they're not always going to do it exactly like you want.
And with kids, if you're going to give them responsibility, then you have to really give them responsibility.
So for example, my kids have responsibility for like making their own breakfast. That's like, you know, one of their things. And they really don't do it like I want them to. It's not because they're very slow. And, you know, like this morning, my daughter like took a really long time to come downstairs, and then she cut like 2 enormous pieces of challah. There was no conceivable way she was going to be able to either eat all of that and certainly not to eat it all in the time that it was allotted. And also, like, that's not a breakfast with a lot of protein. Like, I don't really think that's a great breakfast. But, you know, I told her, I've already said it's your job to like do your breakfast, and then I can't talk. And we're constantly having this thing where my husband is like, you're not supposed to be talking. And then, you know, she didn't really eat it all. And she was like, oh, I'm really hungry. Like, that wasn't a good breakfast. And I was like, yeah, all right. Well, tomorrow maybe I'll pick something else.
And so because you can't be like, all right, come on, I'll make you an egg real quick. And here, actually, I've packed this emergency, you know, avocado toast perfectly packed already that you can take on the way out the door. I've saved you yet again. I am the superhero here. Right. Yeah,
exactly. It's just like, yeah, she went to school and she like hadn't had that much breakfast. Like, it's going to be totally fine. But that's hard.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, anyone with a roommate has gone through this to some, you know, it's like, whatever. Dave was supposed to clean the bathroom and Dave didn't clean now I have to, you know, but at some point we have to do that with our kids if we want them to actually be able to do anything on their own.
Yeah. It's a little bit of a discussion in the book. I think more people have talked about this elsewhere, that like there's value to trying to instill that the kind of independence that comes with this when they're young and the stakes are lower. And, you know, it's hard to sort of start in with like, you should cook your own breakfast when your kid is like 16, because, you know, it seems like high stakes. And if they don't eat their breakfast and then they do badly on the math test, like maybe that really matters in a way that it doesn't when they're 10. But of course, if you haven't instilled it at 16, then they're like off at college and they're calling you like, where do I find the dining hall? And,
right.
You know,
right. We're coming to the end. I have 2 questions that we ask everybody. One is there anything that you found is actually much simpler than people think?
I think there are a lot of things where like more things are fine than people think. So, you know, everybody's like obsessed with screen time and the idea like is there like small amounts of screen time are bad, and like that's just like not true. And sort of similarly, like, is there a specific diet that's like the most important? No. It was just like a lot of places there where I think the data lets you off the hook a little bit. But I feel like nothing is simple about parenting older kids.
No, but I think that's like to take the air out, right? I mean, what's great about your book is to be like, hold on, take a second. We're not going to rush into this, and we're going to look at it from all the angles. And
yeah, and you're probably doing fine.
Yeah. And the last thing I wanted to ask was what are you reading? You have any books you want to recommend?
I really like sort of like nonfiction. So I'm right in the middle of a book about the Rosetta Stone, which is called like the Language of the Gods or something, and it's about the like race to translate to sort of figure out the hieroglyphs based on the Rosetta Stone. It's good.
Nice. Well, I think that pretty much takes us to the end.
This is great. This is super fun.
Cool.
Welcome to the bookend, where we end with books.
It's been so long since I've heard you say that.
Yeah? It really makes a difference, doesn't it?
It does. My nostalgia has been activated. It's nice. Awesome. So that was a great interview. It was really nice to hear you do your thing. And it was great to hear from Emily Oster.
Yeah, it was an honor. She's definitely in the zeitgeist, one of the people with some of the most important takes and approaches and helpful frameworks. During COVID, also, she was really helpful for parents, and her newsletters definitely helped me and just like started nice conversations between me and my sister, for example.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's really great that we could have that time with her.
Yeah. We were very lucky people. So now that you've had a chance to hear it again, because as we said at the beginning, I think it's been a little while since you did this interview. Did anything new stick out to you, or anything else that you didn't realize had stayed with you over time and you've just been kind of enacting?
I mean, like we talked a little bit before the interview, the structures are important. I mean, I definitely like the idea of the cheat code, but also,
that was
but
funny.
also just her approach to, like, you don't have to do every single part of this, you know? I think one thing, I mean, this is not something necessarily we talked about, her and I, but I think what it made clear to me is that a lot of people have structures and have frameworks. They just don't formalize them necessarily in their relationships, in their lives, in their personal lives outside of work, in their parenting. A lot of people do things that are smart and that they don't give each other, they don't give themselves enough credit for. Like, a lot of people say, oh, I don't use any of this parenting stuff. I don't read parenting books. I don't do parenting frameworks. But, like, you know, once a month, my wife and I go out on Saturday night and we talk about how it's going with the kids, and we talk about if we need to change anything in our setup. You know, and it's like, yeah, that's that. You know, and that's great. Don't call it a framework. You know, you're doing your thing. Everybody's trying to find their own way through all the challenges, all the questions.
Yeah.
And that's something that stood out from this interview, is just how broad you can go, how much you can do without the pressure of necessarily having to do everything in an organized way. You can just do some things in an organized way, and that's enough, and that'll be helpful.
Yeah, it's like that idea of just start somewhere. Start small, start
Right.
somewhere. Do something that will give you this feeling of, I have an overview of what I'm trying to accomplish here in my family or in my relationship or whatever. Yeah, I think that's true.
What about you?
I liked this moment of when she talked about the decision to do summer school or not. And she kind of described the framework that she has, the 4 F's, I think, as it's like an opportunity to take a step back and give yourself a little bit of space between that gut reaction that you might naturally have to whatever the problem on the table is. Like, ooh, I don't want my kid to go to summer school. That's 4 weeks away. No way.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
instead of that, if you have a framework that you're using, it serves as a reminder to, like, okay, back off for 1 second, cool off, gather some data, make a decision, consult with stakeholders, which is something that we would totally do in the office, but not necessarily consider our kid a stakeholder. But so many of the Simplify episodes over the years, whether it's been about microdosing or about mindfulness, or actually like a bunch of other episodes, there's so much value in this moment of pause between taking in whatever the information is and reacting. And this is just another sort of moment of dignifying the pause, the space between receiving the information, reacting to the information. And that's what a framework can give us in a lot of ways. So what do you think? Should we do some books?
Yeah, let's do books. I mean, maybe related to that, because related to intention, we did an interview. I mean, I'm joking about being typecast as the simplified dad, but I did an interview with Tina Payne Bryson, who's one of my favorite parenting authors.
Yeah.
She wrote a bunch of books with Dan Siegel, and one of the best books that they did is called No Drama Discipline. And the title of our episode with her was, what was it? What your kid needs most is you.
Yeah.
And when we talk about intention and that pause and like being deliberate and conscientious, there's in Tina Payne Bryson's world, there's this idea that discipline is not punishing, discipline is teaching. And so our job as parents is to discipline, is to show, to guide. And this is especially once kids get a bit older, it's not about like how I'm going to keep this being alive. It's much more about like what kind of person do I want my kids to be and how do I guide them? Because they become their own people, you know?
Yeah.
And when Emily Oster and I talked about breakfast and talked about, look, she wants her kids to make breakfast. And if that means that breakfast is going to not be the right breakfast sometimes, she's not going to step in and she's not going to punish, and she's not going to step in and save the day. She's going to teach. She's going to give the tools. And this is, for example, something that people might do better at work, might do better in like a leadership position, or might do better with friends where they're like, I'm not going to help all my friends' problems.
Yeah.
And yet with your kids, you're like, I have to do everything. I have to be everything for them. I have to fix them. I have to, strongly teach them what's right and wrong and everything. So I want to recommend that book again. And that interview, if you haven't heard it yet, with Tina Payne Bryson, and the book, No Drama, Discipline.
Yeah.
What about you?
My recommendation, we're talking about processes, right? And how having a framework sometimes is really, really useful. Not always. You don't always need a framework, but sometimes you really do, at least to get you started. So the book I'm recommending is called Personal Kanban. It's by Jim Benson and Tonianne DeMaria Barry. Personal Kanban is just a system to get your goals met. Basically, you dump out everything that you need to get done. You decide what steps you need to take in order to get that task done. You break it into small pieces. Sounds a lot like David Allen's method. Also, another episode of this podcast is with David Allen, Getting Things Done. Indeed. So many plugs today. But Personal Kanban is cool. It's a very lightweight sort of personal project management system that you can use to get yourself started. I find myself falling back on it sometimes when I have a lot of unsavory personal life admin tasks to get done, like, seeing the orthopedist and filing my taxes and stuff that I really don't want to do. Yeah. It's useful for me to have a system where I record everything and then I can watch myself make progress. So again, that is Personal Kanban. You can find it on Blinkist or anywhere fine books are sold.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know, that's obviously, that's the big takeaway for me with parenting and the family firm and everything. Like I have my own way of doing it, but knowing that I can reach into the structure, like, reach into a bag of tricks and say, okay, I need this. I'm a bit stuck. I'm a bit overwhelmed. My inner critic is especially loud today. Then let me, lean on the stuff that works for other people and just get started. And then I'll be back in the groove and I'll keep going.
Exactly. Cool.
That's what I hope people got out of today.
Me too. All right. Then that's it.
Let's wrap it up.
Simplify is produced by me, Caitlin Schiller, Ben Schuman-Stoler, Ody Constantinou, here at Blinkist in Berlin, Germany. If you would like to take our survey, we would like that a lot. It is in the show notes. Please go do it. We would love to hear from you. You got a couple more weeks to do it. Maybe literally a couple more weeks, like 2 more max. So please go fill it out. You can find all of the books that we've recommended today on the Blinkist app, which will give you the key ideas from great nonfiction books. You can try it free for 7 days. Just go sign up. And I think that's it. Ben, anything to add?
No, just thanks again for filling out the survey. Give us a couple weeks, after which we will come back with a regular cadence again. We promise we will set to 1 day. We'll publish on the same day at however often, every week or every other week or something.
Yeah.
Right? And I know, because we used to be like Thursday people, but then we did a Friday, and we need to we're going to look in the mirror and decide, who are we? Are we Thursday people? Are we Monday people?
Yeah.
And that's how we're going to build this thing back up. And I'm really looking forward to re-engaging with all the listeners and with everybody again, because the survey really, I don't know, it showed that people care, people are out there, and they want more of this. So we feel this responsibility to deliver on that and make more, and get people the good stuff.
Yeah, exactly. It's been so nice to hear from you and to know that this matters to you and that the work that we do helps you. That's all that really matters to me. So thanks.
+1.
Yeah. All right. Checking out.
See ya.